Okay, guys, so we're gonna go ahead and start on first learning how to draw an eye, and that's the first part that we're going to be concentrating on for the face. We are gonna go over 3 different videos individually, one of the eyes, one of the nose, and then also one video related to the mouth and how to draw them separately. And then there'll be a 4th video that I'm gonna upload that is going to consist of how you put the whole entire face together. Okay, once you understand how to draw each one individually. So for today, we are gonna go ahead and draw an eye, so please follow along. Size-wise, we're gonna start off with the circle first. Remember how I showed you guys in the beginning to kind of get that little shape where you just kind of go round and round and round. And when you feel comfortable, you put your pencil down slowly to get that super light circle. And you're probably gonna have several circles in one, and that's okay. If I were to get really close to this, you'll see several circles. And for the reason being that there might be one that you like I like this one. I can kind of go back and maybe enhance it just a little bit so you guys can see it. You keep it as light as you can, but I'm gonna make it just a little bit darker so you can see which circle I'm gonna be following, which is this one that's right here, okay? If you need to erase the rest, that's why we keep them light. So that way, when you do erase, you're not marking your entire paper to the point where those lines are gonna stay afterwards. And if you do it light enough, guys, as you guys are working on your portraits, then when you start your shading on this, it's going to cover it to where you don't have to do any erasing if you keep it that light, okay? So that's the first step. If you want to write your steps off to the side, you can. Like, you can put step 1, draw a circle. So if you want to write your own steps, you can write just the word steps. And then when you just 1, 2. So if you want to write it on the side, you can do that. You can almost use these as a cheat sheet. So that way, when you start drawing your final, you can come back to these notes of yours. So that way you can have a way of remembering the order on how to draw these. I'm not going to be writing them, but you guys have the option to do so if you want. Okay. So at this point, what we're going to end up doing is we are going to, after we draw the circle, now we're going to start looking at the shape of the eye. So a lot of mistakes that I've seen in the past where people are trying to draw an eye, they want to automatically, and I'll even draw what not to do over here on the side. So I'll draw another circle, and again, this is what not to do. But I've always seen people where they want to start the eye right off the bat, right here on the circle, and they go from edge to edge like that. Like, that's the way they draw the eye. But in reality, you need to make sure that you leave space for what's called the tear duct. So we have a little flap of skin that goes a little bit beyond. So concentrate on drawing the shape of an eyelid, which I'm just drawing the top, and it's just a random eyelid. I'm not following a picture. I'm not looking at anybody in front of me. But when you do your portraits, you do have to be aware of the shape, because there's different shapes. There are some people who have more of a shape where it's more rounded towards the edge and then it kind of curves down this way. There's some people who have a very flat shape. Depending on the ethnicity will also determine the shape. I'm just doing a generic shape. So I'm going to do a generic shaped eye. So I'm just going to try to get some type of shape of arc on the top. And then this is, if you notice, this part of the circle, the reason why we start off with the circle is because this is in representation of the actual eyeball itself. Okay, we're pretending that we've got this eyeball, and that's going to guide us on the rest of the shading and so forth. So as I draw my tear duct, a generic shape for the tear duct, again, depending on the person that you're drawing, will determine if it's going to be a little bit more pointy, a little bit more round, but I'm just drawing a generic shape. They usually have a small curve that goes right here because it comes out with another round shape down here on the bottom because of the actual circle for the eyeball. So it curves up and then it curves down and then it comes back up to connect over here. Now on this part of the eye, we don't have a tear duct. So technically on the outer edge, it does connect right here at the outer edge of my circle. So that's the first part of the actual shape of the eye that we're going to start off with. Now, the second part of the actual eye, what we're going to concentrate on is going to be the inside detail of the eye. And that's going to be related to the iris as well as also the pupil. Now, where people make the biggest mistake. So again, I'm going to draw my mistakes over here. I tend to have people want to draw the iris to fit perfectly within this little spot here. So they make it to fit exactly. The problem is that if you were to look at somebody in real life and somebody that's sitting right in front of you, usually we have the option to do that when we're here face to face in class, because there's people that are sitting right in front of you and you can just look at them. But if you want to look in the mirror right now, if you guys have options to that, or if you have a sibling next to you that you can take a look at, I will show you guys, or you will notice, and I'll kind of pinpoint it so you can look at them, is that you want to make sure that the circle that you originally draw that shape for gets cut from the top eye lid. So usually it gets hidden a little bit on top, and I'm going to draw it very lightly because that line is going to end up getting erased anyways. And then it comes down. And then of course you do have to pay attention to your portrait, because depending on how much wide of the eye will determine your spacing from here as well as from this section over here. But again, I'm drawing a generic eye. And usually if the person is looking right at you, this is usually what it looks like. And this is just, again, a generic shape. I'm not going by looking at anybody. It's just, I know this because I've studied portraits and I've drawn portraits, and I know from looking at a lot of people, the majority, it's not everybody, but the majority, you will see that the top part is getting cut off by the upper eyelid. And usually if there's not any space, it's touching right at the edge. But most of the time, if they're looking dead straight at you, this is more or less the shape, okay? Now, at this point, I am going to also draw the pupil, and this is another mistake I see. Some people will draw either the pupil real tiny, or they'll draw the pupil real big, and they'll leave very little bit of the iris. So if you have a very small pupil, not that you're not maybe going to draw somebody who has that quality to them in their portrait, it's just that if they have a real small pupil, it's probably because you took the photograph with a flash. And so what a small pupil means is that it's retracting to protect the eye because there's too much light. So if I was taking this photograph of this person in the sun, then yeah, they're probably going to have a little bit smaller of a pupil. If there is very little light in the room, there's a lot of shadows, then it'll be a little bit larger. Usually, this is why people sometimes will play around with the flashlight to kind of see the different shapes of the pupil, like it'll kind of go in and out and so forth. For this part, what I'm going to end up doing is I want a generic eye. Again, as far as the shape, we're just going with a random as far as like this is the majority. The size that you want to do is I will put a dot in the middle to kind of guesstimate, okay? And usually, again, usually the distance between the center versus the outside of the actual iris itself or the pupil will be somewhere in the middle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the distance here, and I'm going to go somewhere in the middle and do a little dot, somewhere here in the middle and do a dot. So you're just kind of guesstimating the distance more or less. Same thing right here. It's kind of like in the middle. It's just a little bit like above right here. And that way, when you have as many dots as you want to do, you can just connect the dots and draw another circle that falls in between. So I'm going to just try to connect those dots and keep it as light as possible too, just because, like I said, we might have to erase some of this, okay? But like I said, this is just a generic shape that we're drawing, and this is just the norm. Now, we're also going to do a generic shape for the highlight, because when there's light in the room, you're going to have a highlight, the reflection of the light. We're just going to do a circle. So I'm just going to do a little circle right here, just right here off to the side. And I will erase, of course, anything that falls in between that, because of the fact being that it's a highlight. So it's the brightest point. Are there different shapes of highlights? Yes. It depends on your light source. If the light in my room here, like if I'm looking at these track lighting that I have here, it's fluorescent lighting, it should be more of the shape of a fluorescent light. Of course, with, you have to take in mind that it is going to be distorted because it is a round eyeball. So instead of like, if I were to looking at it in a perspective, so if we're looking at the lights in my room, they're shaped like this as far as perspection, because I've got the perspective going here. So the perspective is going to be way different. So if it's an eyeball and I have this light reflecting, it's going to be more still with that kind of shape. and it's still gonna have a perspective view, but it's gonna be a little bit more curved. So, you know, those are things that you have to take in mind for those of you guys that eventually, when you start doing portraits, are trying to get into realism. Can there be multiple light sources? Yes. So I might have another little highlight, maybe a little bit lower over here if I want to, but for this case, because we're keeping it generic, I'm just gonna leave the one. But can you have multiple? Yes, you know, like I said, depending on how many light sources you have. If I have 2 lamps in the room, I'm probably gonna have another highlight somewhere else, depending on the positioning of the lamp that's in the room, okay? But like I said, we're just gonna keep it simple just with a circle for right now. So at this point, now that I have this part of the eye already, I'm gonna go ahead and draw just a couple more details before we start, like with the shading, just so we have, you know, just a little bit more linear work on it. Now, if you're looking at somebody dead straight, you tend to see, because this is a flap of skin, you tend to see a double line on the bottom. It's not paper thin. Our skin does have a thickness to it. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna draw the double line that falls on the bottom of the eye. We usually do not see this on the upper lid because of the angle that we're looking at the person when you're looking dead straight at them. So I'm just gonna go ahead and draw the second line on the bottom. I'm gonna erase this top part, just this top part of the circle, because I don't need that part. My eyelid is not see-through, so I'm not gonna see that part of the iris. So that gets erased. I haven't erased these lines for the circle yet because those are gonna be my guides for the eyelid in general, the one on top. Now, the other mistake I see, so remember I'm drawing my mistakes over here on this side. The other big mistake that I've seen people do when they're trying to draw, you know, portraits is that they go from starting the eyelid right here and they connect it completely over here off to the side. And remember, they're flaps of skin. So we're not gonna draw it connecting to the tear duct. Usually, and again, usually depending on who you're drawing, they tend to have a space. So it opens and then it tends to go and kind of follow the circle. Like I'm following the circle a little bit, but changing it slightly just to kind of give it more of an organic shape. I'm drawing, if like I said, we know ourselves the best. I've done, I don't know how many self-portraits in the past. So I know my eyelid goes a little bit straight right here. And then my eyelid, again, this is mine, it has another curve that comes this way and then it gets a little bit closer. Not touching, there's always gonna be a space because it's a flap of skin, like I said. But if I was drawing my shape of eye, and I think mine even gets a little bit closer than this over here, but my shape of eye, if I was looking at my left eye, is gonna look more like this, okay? So now at this point, like I said, I'm not gonna erase this because this is gonna help me with my shading. Usually guys, no matter how perfect our skin is, we're gonna have some kind of pigmentation down on the bottom. You might not have ojeras, you might have real good genes, and you might not have like a super strong you know, flap like some people do. Some people have just as heavy of a flap on the bottom as they do on the top because their eye sags that much. It's just in their DNA. But, you know, even if you have perfect DNA as far as super flawless and you have very little bit, you're still going to have some kind of pigmentation. So I do not suggest erasing this because this is going to help you when you start with the shading for the bottom part of the eye. Just leave it there. Just keep it light. If it bothers you a little because it's too dark, just kind of lightly tap it with your eraser, but I'm not going to. I'm going to leave mine there just because I know I'm going to need it for the shading, okay? Now, as far as other details are concerned, before I start the shading, the only other detail, because of course we have eyelashes, but that's the last thing that we're going to do. We have to do all the shading first before we do eyelashes, okay? So the only other detail is going to be the tear duct because it's not showing anything just yet here, and this is going to help guide me when I start my shading. So you do want to draw the little, you're going to enhance the circle, you know, that's original, because it's the original circle that goes around, because I do usually see the edge of where it goes into the skin and all the stuff that the nerve endings and so forth that is here for the tear duct. So I will see that part of the circle. And then, you know, again, this is a generic shape, but I'm just going to draw a little oval shape in here to kind of symbolize my tear duct. So when I start with my shading, I can kind of add that little detail in there. Do some people have more than one little oval shape? Yeah, some people will have like 2 or 3, and they've kind of got these little it's almost like a shiny effect to it because of the part where your eye has to be lubricated and so forth with your natural lining inside. However, right now, like I said, we're just keeping it generic. So just draw this circle and just draw a little oval shape. So you can get really detailed on this stuff. For those of you guys that want to get good at portraits later, you know, it's just following along who you're drawing and what you see. So at this point, I'm going to start some of my shading now. I want it to look a little bit more 3D. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start right off the bat because I want it to already have some kind of, you know, substantial weight to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start first, since I know my pupil is going to be very dark, I'm just going to enhance the line here. And I'm going to start shading, remember circular motion, because I had people that were not doing circular motion the other day on their magazine cutouts. And so their shading wasn't as smooth as it could be. So I'm going to start with the circular motion, and I'm starting off on this side of that circle because I know this is going to be the darkest point because my highlight's over here, which means I should have a little bit of transition going in that direction. So I'm going to start off just like we did with when we originally did the cylinders and the spheres and all that. Remember when we were doing the shapes, the sphere was darkest on this side. So kind of follow that same technique to this, okay? So I'm just gonna stop with as far as pushing as hard as I can up to there. I'm gonna turn my paper just because for me, it's gonna be a little bit easier to pick up the transition. If you go in a different direction, that's fine. So at this point, just be aware that I am going to pick up that gray as I move to the line on this edge of my highlight. So I'm just gonna pick it up slowly so I get the little varieties of grays. If your line is too dark, just kind of tap it lightly so that way it doesn't come through because you do need to have transition as it goes to the highlight, okay? And I'm just gonna transition it to white. And this should be as solid as possible. You know, you might have a little bit of transition. You might see some light grays in there. So if you like the way it looks with a little bit of variety, go ahead. But for the most part, it tends to be for the size of portraits that we're gonna be drawing. For the most part, you're not gonna see that much detail. So that's why I'm just keeping it dark, okay? So now at this point, now that I've got that much shaded, and if you're still shading, that's fine. Just continue and just listen so that way you can move on to the next step when you're ready. What I'm gonna end up doing is I'm also at this time gonna already start the outer area of my iris because no matter if you have colored eyes, no matter if you have brown eyes, no matter if you have what people called shark eyes, where they're super dark brown to where it almost looks black, they're still gonna have this detail. Now, as far as can you see it on some people? No, but you should still apply it just to get in the habit of doing so. People with colored eyes, you're gonna see it a lot more apparent. And they're on the outer edge of their iris, they have a dark pigment at the very, very outer edge that helps outline their particular iris area. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm going to apply that all the way around. For those of you guys that have brown eyes, you do have this. You probably just can't see it. If you were to look in the mirror and have light on your eyes, you will see this detail. So it's not like it's not there. If you guys were to go and really study your eyes, you will, like I said, you will see this particular detail on yours. Okay, so I'm just going to concentrate on making sure that the outer contour, the contour is the line on the outside part, that part is as straight as possible as I work my way around. And you're probably going to make it about just a little thick, like the way you see it here. I'm not going to take it too far in, and it's not too thin either. It's not like just a line. So I did give a little bit of a thickness to it. Just gonna make sure that that outer edge is as clean as possible. Like this is the part I need to make sure that is straight. So now that I have that, there's different types of eyes as far as the color and so forth. Some people, it will go dark to light to the outside, and some people will go dark to light towards the inside because they have more of a brown eye and then it gets like a honey color in the inside. I'm gonna go ahead and go dark to light to the outside. Just remember, we're doing a generic eye just because this is the majority of eyes, but it's not like every single eye is like that. So I'm gonna start off with a medium gray all the way around. If for some reason you lose the line for the pupil, you can always go back, like right here, how I got a little lost, I can go back and darken it and just work my way in to make sure that I don't lose the very edge. But you want to just make sure that you concentrate on getting the same gray more or less around the whole outer edge this way. So I'm going to work on that first. And then if I have to go back and fix that outer edge on my pupil, on the pupil, I can do that. So I'm going to concentrate on just putting, remember, circular motion so that it comes out nice and even when you're doing the transition. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to go back and make sure that I go back and darken the line of my pupil and just make sure that I bring it inside so that way I don't lose the outer edge, okay? So at this point, now that I have that, now I'm gonna go ahead and do my transition towards the outside. So the gray that I'm applying here, so I'm just gonna go to this gray to a light gray towards the outside. The gray that I am applying on this would be probably somebody who has more like colored eyes, you know, maybe either like a hazel or like a light blue tone would be more like this kind of gray that I'm applying here. If you have brown eyes, it'll probably be just a little bit darker than this shading. But I'm just doing this because on the next step that I'm going to show you where we put detail on the iris, you can actually see the detail if I keep it this light. If I make it any darker, you won't be able to see it. So I'm just going to go ahead and apply that gray all the way. When I get here to my highlight, I do want to make sure that I transition just a little bit to that white, just so that it doesn't look like a line. It looks like transition, okay? And I'm turning my paper just for the fact being that it's more comfortable for me to move in that direction as I'm doing the transition. So if you guys need to move your papers around and not do it exactly like mine, it's okay. So I'm going to turn my paper this way because it's more comfortable for me to work into the transition going downward than it is going up for me. And your papers are not stuck to the table, guys, so you can move it around, whatever's more comfortable for you, as long as you're doing the circular motion so it comes out as smooth as possible. And you can kind of go back and look at it. See, like for me, I kind of got a little too dark right there. So I don't recommend like erasing it all. Just kind of lightly tap it with your eraser. And this is like a backwards transition. You know, turn your eraser as you move because you're going to notice that the eraser is going to get a little bit dirty on the edges. So if you turn your eraser as you're tapping it, that'll help keep it clean to where it's not smudging. It's just removing it, and it's like a backwards transition to fix any little spots that are a little bit off, okay? So now that I have that, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna start on the detail that you should find on the iris. So at this point, in order to get practice on this, what I recommend is off to the side of the paper, I do recommend like lifting your pencil so you push and you lift to get a point on the opposite side of the line. And when you feel comfortable with that movement, that lift, then you're gonna come to your eye and you're gonna work from the center out and you're gonna lift it before you get towards the very outer edge. So I'm just gonna take it and I'm gonna push and lift, push and lift. Some are gonna be short, some are gonna be long, and that's okay. You don't want them all the same because it's texture and it shouldn't be exactly all the same. So I'm just gonna work my way, some short, some long. The more variety of lines, the better it's gonna look. Make sure you also twist your pencil as you're moving your way this way, because if you do that, you'll keep a sharp point and it won't get dull. Some reach all the way, some don't, and that's okay. You want a variety of length of lines. So I'm just gonna work my way. Here, of course, it's very shallow, so I'm just gonna take it just a tiny bit going up. Some of these are gonna actually be covered, and you'll see right now when we continue the shading on the eye. So I'm gonna go around and I'm gonna just put a few right here after on the top part of the highlight, just because the highlight is blocking where they're starting from. So if I were to start pretending that the highlight was here, they'd actually be starting this way. So I'm just gonna put just a couple of them, just a few of them, so that way you can still see some of the, I'm missing one right here, so I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna add one right there. So just kind of go back and forth with it. Now, can you go opposite? Yes, because I've had people ask me before, we're sticking to this generic shape, but I've had people where they go opposite and they start here and they go inward. There are some people who have that much detail. So yeah, you might see it on some people. But like I said, I'm keeping more of a generic shape of eye. And so I'm not gonna add it, but you can if you wanna try it. I mean, this is the time to try it on your practice, guys, because you might not like it. And so you're like, no, I'm not gonna add this on my final. So this is the time to make the mistakes, okay? Now at this time, I want the eye to look a little bit more 3D. So where I see the mistake is that usually people will leave the white as white and they absolutely add no shading. And that's not the case. If you look in the mirror, you're gonna notice shadows and so forth, even if it's the white of the eye. So because the actual skin sits on the eye, and I've kind of already told you guys this from the first, when we were doing the first assignments in the first part of the semester, if you put something on top of something else, it's gonna cast that little tiny shadow. So it's the same thing. If the actual eyelid sits on the eyeball, it's gonna cast a small little shadow. So in order to make this look more 3D, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my line that's for the eyelid and I'm gonna darken it real dark, okay? And I'm going to pick up that transition very, very quickly. I'm not gonna take that transition down too far down. I'm just gonna bring it maybe up to here at the most. So you're gonna lift that transition as quick as you can. So I'm gonna do the same thing for this part. You know, I'm gonna, even though it's the iris, I still have that little shadow. So I'm gonna go dark to light, just about the same amount that I have taken off this one. And I'm just gonna work my way around on the top with that same detail. So I'm gonna push hard and then I'm gonna go dark to light towards the inside of my eye. And same thing over here. So I'm gonna darken the line and I'm just gonna pick it up dark to light. Make sure it's all about the pressure. I'm still moving in a long oval shape. I'm still doing that circular motion. A lot of people forgot about the circular motion. I was looking at some of the transitions on this last assignment and they could have been a lot better. You know, you want to make sure that you guys are doing that circular motion, okay? And that'll cast that little shadow to make that eyelid look like it's actually sitting on top of the eyeball. Now, it's still gonna have a shadow on the bottom. It's probably not gonna come out as much because more light is hitting from this direction, but I should still have a little bit of also a shadow. So I'm not doing the shadow from this side, I'm doing the shadow from the first line that's closest to the actual eye. So I'm just gonna take this also and I'm gonna go dark to light just a little bit inside. And that's what's really gonna start making things look more 3D. If you do it right, especially on these practice eyes, you're gonna end up making it look like the eye is coming out of, you know, the paper itself because you're applying the shadows correctly. So if you guys learn how to do the shadows, you can really benefit and make it look super 3D. Okay, so I just did that just a little bit, and then I'm gonna do the same thing all the way around. I'm moving my paper because it's more comfortable for me to do the transitions in this direction, but whatever is more comfortable for you, you just move the paper to where you guys can add transition. Because the transition, I know some people feel more comfortable going up, some people feel more comfortable going down, some people feel more comfortable going to the side. So whatever is more comfortable for you, move your paper in that direction so you can make that transition as smooth as possible, okay? So at this point, what I'm gonna end up doing is I wanna make it look a little bit more 3D. So I'm going to push back the areas of the tear duct that are just a little bit more, that they should create the shadow effect. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm going to push real dark in here. If we're looking at something that's a little bit more realistic, like if I was looking at a photograph, I probably wouldn't see it this dark, but like I said, we're just drawing a generic eye. And so I'm just gonna create some shadows just to kind of create more of a 3D effect, okay? Because I want it to look as 3D as possible. So on the tear duct, what I want to end up doing is it's inside. So on the outer area, which is right here, you are going to have a little bit of a shadow casted. Same thing like this, how all of this casts a shadow. This is going to cast a shadow on my tear duct. And then again, this is a generic one. You guys might see some other types of highlights on yours, but I'm just keeping this to where if I was looking at it like in the very beginning when I was teaching you guys about the shapes, if I was looking at it as if it were a sphere, I'm just gonna go dark to light over here where I have my little highlight. So I'm gonna leave the highlight on that side. And I'm gonna push the shadow just a little bit more on this side, just so that it pops a little bit more. If I wanted to pop even more, I can do a little bit more shadow on this side. But like I said, it depends on how far you guys actually want to stretch this and how realistic you want it to look, okay? So I'm not done yet. People might say, well, no, the white of the eye, it already looks good. It already looks like it's inside the flaps of the eyelids. But that's not the case, because remember, it's a sphere, guys. It's a sphere, so you still need to have, we need to make it look a little bit more round. I want to add a little bit of gray over here, a super light gray, because it is a white eyeball, okay? So I don't want to make it too dark. We're not making it like as if it was a very dark sphere, but it's going to be more of like a light gray. And then the most important thing is don't lose all the white. So I am going to, just like I lifted it very quickly over here to the highlight, I'm going to lift the transition towards the white in this direction, just enough to where I see the transition and I don't lose the white of the eye. Now, you also notice I left a little highlight right here. You can choose not to have the highlight. Some people like to have the highlight because it enhances the edges. If you were to look at and you really study objects in lighting, different types of lighting, sometimes you can have these little auras of light that actually casts around the circles and so forth, right at the very edge. So some people don't like to take it just because as a drawing, it helps to enhance edges. So you can, or you can choose to take the gray all the way up. See, I mean, try it. You're going to do two separate eyes. Try it maybe different on both and see what works better for you. What do you like the look of better? Okay. And again, we do still need a little bit of gray on this side as well. So the same thing that I did on that side, I'm going to go ahead and just take this gray just to kind of create a little bit more 3D of effect. The more shadows, the more shading that you add automatically, the better it's going to look. Now, I'm not going to take this too far out, probably just up to here at the most. Notice that there's more white of the eye on this side than there is on the other side, and that's fine. You know, I mean, if the person is looking in this direction, then there's going to be more white of the eye on this side. So that's another thing, is what direction is your person looking at in your photograph? I'm just going to stretch this gray just a little bit on this part, just because I feel it should have a little bit more. Okay, so some people will want to even go beyond this and add little veins on the eyes, because we do have some small ones. Some people show more than others. I would practice off to the side if you want to attempt this. If you don't like the way it looks, you don't have to add it. Some people didn't like it in the years in the past when I was showing this, and they just wanted to not add it. That's okay if you don't want to do that much detail, but if you do want to get a little bit more detail, make it look even more realistic, I would practice it over here. And you want to kind of think of it like lightning. I always say, if you really study these, they don't follow a certain path. They kind of think of either like roots to a tree or branches to a tree or lightning bolts. So like if you were to watch natural lighting on the sky, when there is lightning, they tend to kind of go up and down. They kind of scatter. Some will even go around this way. So, and then there might be another one attached over here somewhere to it, maybe a little bit lighter because it's not as apparent. So if you practice on the side and you feel comfortable, yeah, I think that kind of looks like it would be like a natural little vein, then you can add it over here. So I'm only gonna put maybe just a couple. I'm not gonna put too many on mine. You know, I'm just gonna kind of bring it out this way just because there was already a line there, and I'm just gonna kind of bring it this way. Like I said, if you don't like the way it looks, then don't add it. I'm just adding just a few tiny little ones. I'm not gonna put too many. I'll probably put maybe just one more over here. And again, you don't have to add these. If you don't like the way they look, you're like, no, I like the way the eye looked clean, then you can just leave it clean, okay? I'm just showing it to those kids who wanna add more detail into their work because they're gonna do maybe a blow up version of the face and they're gonna draw it that big, okay? So when it comes to the shading on the top, the eyelid, you know, that really just also depends on the ethnicity. Some people don't have a very deep eyelid. In the Hispanic culture, it's kind of like a half and half because some people that have more Indian blood and so forth, the Native American blood, and also like Indios, like the ones that are come from deep Mexico and stuff like that. Some of them have different shapes of eyes. And so sometimes they won't have very thick lids and some people do. So everybody's different. Nobody is the same. So if you don't have a lot, it's gonna be more transition. So if it's not a deep, heavy lid, then it's just all transition. You're not gonna have an actual crease. If you have a crease, it's gonna create more shadow and it's not gonna be as dark. Well, I mean, if it's that deep, it will be as dark, but usually it's more of like this gray. So again, I'm doing generic. I'm just going average. Mine is actually very deep. Like if you were to pay attention to mine, it actually is a lot darker. Like it's more like the same shadow that I would for my eye. But you know, I'm just going generic. So not everybody has it that dark. So I'm just gonna go ahead and just do a regular gray on my example. And I'm just gonna go dark. Remember, circular motion is what makes things look a little bit more smooth. And you also want to use the side of your pencil. That's another thing. If your shading is not coming out as smooth as you would like, it's probably because you're using more of the tip of the pencil versus the side of the pencil. So I'm just going to go dark to light to the outer edge this way. Try my best to get it as even as possible with the shading. You know, take your time on this part if you can. I'm turning it just because I know I have to go dark to light from here this way. And it's just easier for me to move in this direction. So whatever direction is easier for you, move your paper around. And I'm probably gonna go even just a little bit deeper than that. So I kind of want just a little bit darker of a gray. If some parts of the crease is more than others, it's because this part actually goes in a lot more. So it's gonna cast a deeper shadow, okay? We do have gray also here, like for girls who put on makeup, usually you know about that highlight that people will put highlight on this part. So if I'm doing the shading, we're just gonna do a little bit. We're not gonna do too much, but if we're doing the shading for this, I'm gonna stick to just a medium gray over here because the eye has to connect somehow. So I am gonna put a little bit of the grays here just to make sure that I start already learning how to do this. So when we start with the full face, then you already have this practice, okay? So I'm gonna put a little bit of gray here, circular motion. I'm gonna take the gray up to where that circle is that I had lightly drawn for that highlight. So I'm gonna make sure that this gray also is the same over here because this is where my highlight is for the eye. So I do want you guys practicing on shading at least this far. We're not gonna do the eyebrows just yet because there's a lot to explain about the eyebrows and I'm gonna go over that when we start putting the full face together, okay? So now that I kind of have, it's not gonna stay like that, but now that I kind of have the gray that goes beyond that, then the same way we did the shading here, I'm just gonna go ahead and I'm just going to take this gray and try to transition it to a lighter gray towards the middle of that highlight. Because it's not white unless you put on makeup. If you guys that put on makeup, you know, because girls and guys wear makeup now. So if you guys like to put on highlights and contour and all that stuff, and you guys are gonna add those particular tones to your face, then you just wanna make sure that if that is apparent that you apply a lighter gray, an even lighter gray, because it should be a lot shinier. But for the most part, if you're not wearing makeup in your picture, it's just gonna be a light gray like this, because there still should be some type of a highlight because your bone structure and the way that our skull underneath the skin is protruding in certain spots, you should have some kind of highlight here, okay? And that's the highlight right there that you have to make sure that you apply. So the other highlight that we usually have, because of our tear duct, you'll have a highlight that falls somewhere right here. So what I like to do in order to get that is I'll bring this gray down like this, and then I'll just leave this white for now. So I'm just gonna take it like this, and then this is gonna be the gray that's gonna come down here. And then I'll just make sure that when I start getting ready here for the under eye part right here on the eyelid, and then I'll leave this as a highlight, and then I'll do the same thing. I'll just make sure that that transitions to that lighter gray right there. So it creates that little highlight for the tear duct. So now that I've got that, I want to make sure that I incorporate the gray down here. So what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to use that original circle that I had here as a guide, and I'm just going to put a little bit darker of a gray in this area right here. Now, no matter how perfect your skin is, you're still going to have a little bit of discoloration in there. So if you don't want to do it super dark, even though it shows it on the picture, you still have to at least apply, because you should try to follow the grays. Otherwise, it's not going to look like you. But I would apply just a little bit of gray like this. Make sure that this gray goes all the way, and I'm going to lift it to get a little bit lighter, but I need to make sure that it goes all the way to that second line that we originally drew. So just with the circular motion, go slowly and try to get the side of your pencil so it comes out smooth. Now, if you have very deep, you know, underbags like the ojeras, if you do have very deep color, like it's very, very dark, then you're gonna have this gray as well on this side too. People who don't have them as deep a tone, then more than likely it's just gonna be on this side that you see a little bit darker of the color, okay? So I'm just gonna add a little bit of gray because we're not gonna draw too much of the eye. This is as far as we're gonna get as far as detail. The only other thing that I do want you to practice are the eyelashes. Now, the eyelashes are another thing that you guys are gonna have to practice off here on the side. So it was the original line for the irises. If you're gonna do the veins, practice off to the side. And then you're also gonna wanna practice eyelashes. You have to practice them in both directions. So the ones on the top, and I recommend if you want to draw just a simple outline here to practice, just so that way you could practice how you're going to do the flick of the wrist, you want to kind of just bring it up. So I'm going to put here, and I'm going to put to where it goes like this, and it's got like kind of a round shape. Now, if it's a girl that has, if it's a girl that's wearing makeup, then, and usually they use, you know, like their, I forgot what they call it, because I don't use makeup, but the ones that you use to kind of crimp the eyelash, they're going to be even more round because they are applying that particular shape to it. But if they're more natural, they're going to slightly curve, and then they might be straight. Some are going to be short, some are going to be long. Same thing like when we were working with the detail with the iris, it's the same thing. So you want to make sure that as you guys are applying this, that you practice first. Once you get comfortable, you know, some of them are going to crisscross, some of them are going to overlap. Once you get comfortable with that, then you can come over here and try applying it. Now on the top, they're just going to be right on the actual line itself. So I'm going to take it here and I'm just going to start. These are kind of more or less natural eyelashes. They're not too long, they're not too short. Some, depending if they curve a lot, will go a little bit underneath like this. And then some actually go straight up and they're kind of flat. So depending on who you're drawing will determine what they're actually going to look like as far as, you know, the shape. Some will be like, if you're wearing makeup, they're going to be this long, guys. So the girls who wear mascara, and if you, especially if you wear fake eyelashes, they're going to be pretty long, and you might end up drawing them like this if that's the way you are on the picture, which some people, just to take a picture, will doll themselves up, excuse me, just a little bit, just to make sure that they come out good on the photograph. So that's fine. Now be aware that if you guys are doing them more natural, it's fine if they're a little bit shorter. And then also when you get here to the center, they're gonna start to curve differently, and they're gonna start coming in this direction, and they usually get smaller hairs as they move over here, and they're even less. They're not gonna have as many, okay? So I'm going a little bit on top of my iris just because I know naturally they do curve down a little bit, especially if I'm putting on makeup. They'll go down just slightly because of the curve. On the bottom eyelashes, so if you want to practice the bottom, you can also do the shape here. They're going to be curving in this direction. They're usually smaller. They tend to curve a little bit more just because they are facing down. And then, of course, they get even less over here. So just be aware that those are going to start on this line here. So I'm not going to start them from the right here where the shading is. They start because I have the thickness of my eyelid right here. So I'm going to start going in this direction. Some might be straight. That's okay. You know, I'm going to put more of course, over here. Maybe I have a grouping like this, and then they kind of go like this. So there's spacing in between that, and that's fine. If you're looking at natural eyelashes, they'll do that. Okay, you'll have a couple maybe growing in the same spot, and then you'll have like a little gap, and then they start like in this direction. So just follow what you see in the pictures as you guys are drawing them. And if you don't see this amount of detail on your pictures that you've chosen, you draw what you see. So if you can't see this on the final, that's okay. You know, I'm just wanting you to go by your reference pictures. So, you know, if you want to add it, maybe your reference picture doesn't necessarily have it, and you want to add it, okay, go ahead, you know, practice it. You know, this is the time to make your mistakes, especially on the practices before you start on your final. Okay, if you feel like, nah, I want to take that shadow a lot more, then take it a lot more right now on the practice. Okay, so this is as far as we're gonna get for today for the practice. You know, I mean, if this were me, I would go back and I would make sure that I do my shading a little bit better. Like I would go back and kind of darken maybe some of this shadow work right here, because usually we tend to have a little bit more. If I want to look in the mirror and kind of go back and go by myself, like if I'm looking at myself to kind of get some of this deeper shadows, because right now where I'm sitting, I see a little bit more shadow right here if I'm looking in the mirror. And then this shadow kind of comes this way. So, I mean, if you want to enhance the shadows because that's what you see on, like you're looking at yourself in the mirror and you're like, no, the way Miss Palmenes did it, it's not, it looks too light. I need to go back and I need to bring some of the shadows out a little bit more. Go for it. You know, this is the time, like I said, to do your practices. You should have done one with me, which is this one that we did right now in camera. And then, you need to do another one by yourself. When you guys upload, I'm gonna open it today. So right now when I get off camera, I'm gonna go ahead and put it to where you guys can upload it to me, but you should be uploading a total of 2 different practices. The one you did with me right now, and a second one that you're supposed to do by yourself. So that way I can see that you understood the process and you can do it all by yourself without having to need help. And if you do the mistakes and you need help, this is the time, like I said, to ask so that way I can help you through it. Okay, so I'm going to stop the recording there.